Hello, and welcome to the Skilled Assessor's Introduction to the Coordinated Entry System. My name is Liza DeShano, and I'm the Coordinated Entry Specialist at the Center for Housing and Health. Here's a list of what we'll be covering in this presentation. Let's get started. The Chicago Coordinated Entry System was rolled out in 2017 in response to a federal mandate that all continuums of care, or COCs, adopt this streamlined approach to prioritizing and distributing resources. The Chicago COC is comprised of more than 100 organizations and individuals who work together to prevent and end homelessness in Chicago. Representatives from each of these agencies work together to support implementation and refinement of CES in Chicago. But why CES? Coordinated entry is a front door approach for people experiencing homelessness to access housing and support. Before CES, the responsibility of finding housing support was largely placed on people experiencing homelessness. With CES, there is one assessment that provides access to housing resources all over the city, so clients are not restricted to resources that are close to their location, and they don't have to repeat their story for every single application. Further, CES increases access because referrals are not based on the preferences or contacts a case manager has. In fact, clients don't even have to have a case manager to be assessed for CES. Lastly, people get linked to resources that match their needs instead of just the first resource that's available. CES matches households to a variety of permanent and short-term housing solutions. Here's the CES workflow. The steps that you are responsible for as a skilled assessor are circled in red. I will explain each of these steps in this presentation. First, engage. The first step of CES is engaging the target population. Access points designated for walk-in CES assessments and updates are located on each side of the city at locations where people experiencing homelessness visit in high volumes. These are highlighted in red. There are also some shelters, drop-in centers, and outreach teams who have skilled assessors on staff. Here are the locations of the access points. This is also available on the CSH website. The next step of the workflow is assess. But before you assess someone, you need to verify that the person is eligible for CES. Here's why eligibility is so important. First, you don't want to waste your time or the client's time. Second, it's better for the client to find out now rather than later if they're not eligible. For instance, if the client is matched to a housing provider who learns that the person is not literally homeless, they will not move forward with housing the client. Third, while time is being taken for the housing provider to interview that person, determine they are not eligible, and request another match, there's an empty unit that someone else could have had. And lastly, empty units could result in HUD providing less funding next time around because it looks like we don't need the funding. So who's eligible? Adults ages 25 and over who are experiencing literal homelessness, and youth ages 18 to 24 who are unstably housed or experiencing literal homelessness are eligible for CES. You can determine who is experiencing literal homelessness and therefore who is eligible for CES by asking, "Where did you sleep last night?" People who slept outside or in a shelter or are fleeing domestic violence are always eligible and can move forward with the CES assessment. So you've determined the client is eligible. The first part of the CES assessment is identification and housing eligibility. It contains yours and the client's contact information, location of the assessment, housing history, income, sheltered status, and length of time homeless. It is important to include detailed, updated contact information so that when the household is matched to a housing intervention, we are able to connect with them. The second part of the assessment is the VI, which covers any disability information and the client's trauma history. When you finish the assessment, make sure the client knows to update their assessment regularly. Give them the client brochure with their HMIS number and your contact information. Next in your workflow is triage. If the person is a veteran, a youth, fleeing domestic violence, or needs shelter tonight, attempt to connect them to an immediate resource. These are things that might come up during the assessment. There are almost 9,000 people on Chicago's One List. The One List is populated from HMIS and includes information on all people currently experiencing literal homelessness in Chicago. Over half of those on the One List have been assessed for the coordinated entry system. One List information is always available on the All Chicago dashboard. Catholic Charities gets notified about a unit vacancy from a housing provider, and then uses the One List to match a household that meets the eligibility criteria for the unit and is the most vulnerable according to our system's prioritization plan. There's a limited amount of resources available for housing, and so we must dedicate our resources to those who are the most vulnerable. Our community made the decision to prioritize those who have been homeless for the longest amount of time and those who are unsheltered. You can read more about the prioritization plan on the CSH website. The last step in your workflow is the match. When someone you've assessed is matched to housing, you will receive an email from Catholic Charities. When you receive an email like this, you are responsible for reaching out to the client to let them know about the match and give them information to connect with the housing provider. The email will also include the housing provider the client is matched to and the housing system navigator. Housing system navigators can help clients get documents together and make appointments with the housing provider. When you reply to the email, make sure you hit reply all to keep everyone in the loop. Applicants become inactive after 30 days if their only encounter with the homeless system is the CES housing assessment. These applicants need to update their assessment every 30 days. If households receive services from a homeless provider such as a shelter, outreach, or drop-in center, they will remain active while they are working with the program and do not need to update their assessment unless information changes. If households re-engage, they do not need to start a new assessment. Finally, as a skilled assessor, you are responsible for keeping clients' information private, doing enough assessments to maintain familiarity with the system, completing the assessment fully and accurately, attending at least 2 trainings per year, as well as the quarterly skilled assessor meeting, and providing high-quality care to each client that you encounter. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions, concerns, or feedback in response to this training. Thank you for listening.
Hello everyone, this is Anna Carvlin. I am going to be walking you through the HMIS Standardized Housing Assessment. I'm on the HMIS team here at All Chicago, and we'll be going through this assessment. And a couple of things to know, what I like to do when I am sitting down with a client is to have all of these reference articles open. So I've got several reference articles that are all on our help desk. So if I were you, I would go to the hmis.allchicago.org help desk in order to favorite this page. And then you can look in the coordinated entry section down here and explore this section and look at all the articles. There are a few things that we need to update because we just now updated the coordinated entry assessment, but we're going to be updating this, but there's still a lot of definitely relevant current articles. So a couple of things I would have open are the CES Eligibility Pre-Screener. This is new. The information isn't new, but this is new, and we want you to be familiar with the information on here before you open up an assessment. I would have the client consent and supplemental ROI. Before you go into HMIS to create a client record, you should know whether or not the client is willing to share their information, and if they do not agree to share any information, you'll never open up a client assessment for coordinated entry. Housing history tool, I would have this open because it tells you the correct way to complete a housing history tool. Leave the end date empty. All of the types of places are complete. There's no future dates here, and there's descriptions where it's relevant. I'll go through that in the assessment. And then the youth eligibility for assessment too, you might want to review that. And when I'm sitting down with a client, so first what I'm going to do is determine their eligibility, and then I'm going to determine whether or not they want to share their information. So first I want to see, are they staying in emergency shelter or a place not meant for habitation? Definitely go ahead and complete the assessment with this client unless they've chosen option C, they don't want to share their information. Were they in jail or prison and they exited today, and were they there for less than 90 days, and prior to that they were in a place not meant for habitation? You can continue if that's the case. If they're in a healthcare facility, again, caveats to that. And if they're unstably housed, again, caveats to that. So you'll want to review this and know this information by heart. For the moment, you can have this open to refer to it. We've determined that our client is in a car, and so she has agreed to share her information. She chose option A. And again, so she chose option A. We are going to go ahead and create the client record because, well, first we're going to see if the client's in the system. And then we're going to create a client record, and then we're going to enter them into the project. So the very first thing as a skilled assessor that I need to do, for 90% of skilled assessors, I should say, if you're the 10% that your only project is coordinated entry, then you won't ever have to enter data as. But if you are part of other projects like an emergency shelter, you'll need to enter data as a skilled assessor. So you can kind of fill in the blank, enter data as a skilled assessor. But if your only job is a skilled assessor, you don't have to do that. So we're going to enter data as, you should only have a couple options here, but you can find the correct project. And now I'm in enter data as mode. So I can always check up here if I'm not sure. We're going to want to head over to client point to see if our client is in the system. And let's see, we've got, actually this Jade is Jade Toyota. Let's see, actually we're going to clear this out here. Jade Toyota. We're going to search for the client. I do not see a client that pops up. I've checked different spellings. I've checked to make sure the client is sure they're not in the system. I definitely don't want to add a duplicate client record. If the client insists that they're in the system and they're sure of it, and for some reason you just can't find it and they have a locked file, then you would go ahead and create a paper assessment and then let us know, hmis@allchicago.org, that you have to unlock their file. So just, you can complete the paper assessment, which actually, because we just changed this 2 days ago, it's outdated. We need to update this. We will do that very soon. So we're looking for Jade Toyota. She's not in the system. We're going to add Jade Toyota, and she's given us her full name And this alias, we can optionally fill that out if it's available. Fill out the Social Security if you have it, and fill out whether or not they're a veteran. All right here. You can do that a little later in their client profile, but preferably you would do it right here because we need that information. You're always going to pick this middle option, add new client with household, and then this is a female with child. Again, go ahead and continue. We've got all their client record information. The one thing you're going to need to change here is that they are the head of household. You will never be assessing somebody who is not the head of household. Now you've got the household information, and then you're not going to need to add children here because we're going to add the children information in the actual assessment. The other thing is you have completed the client consent and you completed a paper copy, so that needs to stay somewhere. You're welcome to scan it and upload it to the client profile. So what you would do is you'd head over to the client profile, scroll down to add new file attachment, choose file, and just pretend that's a client consent form and name it. That's not required, but it is a good idea because we want to have their consent on record. What you don't need to do is come over here and complete the ROI like you would normally for other projects. So you don't need to do this. We do need you to do the paper copy, and we do need you to indicate their consent in the assessment itself. So now we're ready to enter them into coordinated entry. I always double check I'm in the correct EDA mode. We're going to add entry. This auto populates to the 1474, and then we're going to do HUD entry. You would backdate this if you had done a paper copy 2 days ago and then are inputting it today. Otherwise, just leave this. And then if she had 3 kids listed here, let's say this client record was pre-existing in the system, and she had her 3 kids listed here, you would only keep her checked. Don't check the kids too. Now we save and continue. So there's lots of things here. This diversion pre-screener, you will have been specifically trained on that. That's for dedicated assessors right now. The standardized housing assessment is what you're going to be looking at, and you'll also look at the VI disability, vulnerability index, and disability. So Jade Toyota is a woman. She's got 3 kids. She's living in her car. I did already complete the eligibility assessment here, and so I'm going to click yes. We put this question in here so that you can just double check that you're making sure to assess people that need to be assessed, because we've gotten a lot of people that don't actually need to be in the coordinated entry project. So we want to make sure people are actually homeless or fleeing domestic violence. So you're going to have to copy this URL. We can't add a hyperlink in this system, and I already had it open over here, but just to double check your work. So yes, we already did the pre-eligibility. We completed the consent, and we already uploaded it. So the individual did complete the consent. We wouldn't be in this system if they didn't choose A or B. So we're good. They chose A. We actually find out that they have had a history of domestic violence, so we're going to actually just pick B. Even if they picked A, we're going to pick B because they have a history of domestic violence. So we're going to later lock the file. You don't need to do the assessment attempts. This is for people who may not have their full faculties and are not able to complete the assessment with you, and so they may need an observational assessment. So if you're not able to complete the assessment, you would just document that here. These are new safety questions. I'll let you read through these on your own. And then there are some resources listed here for DV and human trafficking. So you should not, we've already, talked about continuing or stopping. This is just another reminder. We don't want people completing the assessment if they're not homeless. You're going to completely fill out your entire first, last name, location, etc., etc. We want to know all of your information, and then if a previous assessor's information is in here, we want you to overwrite it. We want you to delete it and write your own information in. This is the client contact information, and we need that information completely filled out. If you have an alias, great, put it in here. That's a different field from that initial client profile field. So if you typed it in there, you're going to have to retype it in here. This relationship is always self. We said that Jade chose female and that she prefers she, her, hers pronouns. Primary race and ethnicity, we want to get that down as well. And we're just going to say that Jade was born in 1980. So again, fill out all of the contact information as much as you can, information on social services, and then alternative contact information as well. Anything that can help us find them if they get matched to housing. So that's why there's all this notes that you can add as well. We'll refer to that if we're trying to find the client later. Are they a veteran? If you don't know the veteran definition, you can hover here. You can also click and then just read through the definition. We've determined Jade is not a veteran. And so these questions are no, we're not going to complete the other veteran information. If you ever have questions about veterans, you can email jessica.smith@csh.org. The housing history situation and information is really important. We want to understand this housing history because it determines their chronic status, it determines their length of time homeless. So this whole section, including this length of homelessness, this whole section is really important. We've determined that Jade's situation is Category 1 homeless. She has a history of DV, but she's not fleeing domestic violence. If this were to be a youth and they were at risk of homelessness, you could choose at risk. And then just be sure to understand the youth eligibility for assessment and whether or not they could possibly be diverted. You'd want to work that out as well. Category 1 homeless, prior living situation is where did they sleep last night? Place not meant for habitation. Length of stay in previous place is 1 week or more, but less than a month. We're saying it's about 28 days. However, Jade stayed in the car for 28 days, but then she had a week where she was on the street. And so we're going to say she was on the street, and so that was actually 11/8/2019 is when her approximate date homelessness started. Now, a while back, even further back, Jade was in an emergency shelter earlier in 2019. But that's not when we're going to start this question. We're not going to use that date for this question because she had an interruption of more than 7 days. So she had stayed at a shelter in August. But between that and the time she was on the street, she was at a friend's house for 2 months. So if she was at her friend's house for 6 days, we would look at that time period for the start of homelessness, but because she was there for 2 months, we're only looking back at this current situation, and we're looking at all the current situations combined, current homeless locations. As long as she's been homeless, we're looking at that cumulative situation, and that's 11/8, since it's about a month and a week. Regardless of where they stayed last night, number of times the client has been on the streets, in emergency shelter, or safe haven in the past 3 years, including today, is 2. Total number of months homeless, on the street, in emergency shelter, or safe haven in the past 3 years, we're going to say 2. Because technically it's about a month and 3 weeks. But this current situation is 1 month and 1 week. And so we can count that partial week for this current situation as a month. But you cannot look back in time at a situation a long time ago that was 2 weeks and call that a month. So it gets a little tricky when you're looking at this question, but just understand that you can only count the current situation as a full month if it's a partial month. So let's just say it's 1 week, or 1 month and 1 week. You can only count that current situation as a full month. Where does the client typically stay? We're trying to get at their unsheltered status or their sheltered status. So we want to get a sense of where they are. The client typically stays, we're looking at their quote prior living situation and where did they sleep last night. So in this current client scenario, we are pretending that this person stayed on the street last night or in a car last night and also is going to stay in a car tonight. I'm an outreach worker for this purposes. And so we're referring to this question when we're asking about the typical situation. And so yes, because she has been staying there for more than 3 weeks. So we're calling typical about 3 weeks. And then because this is a place not meant for habitation, we want to be clear on what's going on. So it's a car. That's where she's sleeping. The next 2 questions don't apply to us, and if there's more information, please add it here. She does have 3 kids and they're with her, so yes, we want to answer yes to that question. For the length of homelessness, we really want to get this housing history tool correct, so we're looking at the past 5-year time frame, housed or unhoused, and then we want the start date of one location to equal the end date of the other location. So let's start with that. So what we're looking at, the other thing to note about this, if the person has, for example, this current instance that you're meeting with them, they have been for the past year living in a CTA, on the street, in a car, all kinds of places outside. You can feel free to clump that all into one instance as long as it's the same. It's a place not meant for human habitation outside. And so outside or on the CTA or in a car. So you can feel free to not add 100 entries into the housing history tool and just try to gauge when the person was homeless and when they were in a shelter and when they were not homeless at all. That's what we're trying to get at. So for this person, for this situation, I am going to actually break up this past month and a week to show that they were in a car and also on the street. It won't be terrible if you decided to clump those 2 things together, but for the sake of this, we're going to separate it. So the start date for that situation was 11/15, and we're not going to put an end date because it's the current situation. This is a place unfit for habitation because it's a car. If you have more details, add them here. And then we're going to add another situation. Just remember this 11/15. That'll be the end date of the next situation. So the next situation is only about a week. And we're calling that 11/8. And then the end date is this 11/15. And then this is also was a place not meant for habitation because it was on the street. And if you have details, let us know. So let's remember this 11/8 because it'll be the same as the end date for the next situation. The start date for that situation is 9/8 and the end date was 11/8. Did I say remember the 11/15? I meant 11. Remember the end date is equal to the next start date. So 11/8. And this was actually with a family or friend. She was staying with a friend for a little while, for 2 months. And so let's remember the start date is 9/8. We're going to add another situation. This is tricky to do if you didn't write it down on a piece of paper first. So you might want to do that unless the person just has a pretty clear history. And the start date was 8/25. So about 2 weeks. They were in a shelter. So it is a homeless situation. And then we're just going to add one more situation, which is they lived in their own apartment or house for quite a long time. And the start date of that was 2014. And then the end date was the same as the start date of the last situation we put in. And we just want to make sure to go back about 5 years, so we don't have to add anything prior to this. So once I'm done, I just want to make sure everything looks correct. This equals this, this equals this, this equals this, and this equals this. Even if you have to gauge a little bit and fudge it just a little bit, try to get these equal. Just so we know that there's not any major gaps. The most important is that you're documenting the homeless scenarios, but we definitely want to have you fill this type of place out. And if you don't complete it, I will email you. Please be sure to get this one correct. If you accidentally went into create a project entry into coordinated entry and forgot to click enter data as, and you entered this whole assessment as under your own project, you're actually going to have to go in and delete all of these instances under your own project and then come back in and enter data as mode to redo the entire assessment, including the housing history tool, because we don't want these duplicated in our account on the end on the one list. So the current situation is, where are you going to sleep tonight? And we know that this person is going to sleep still in her car. We didn't figure out a solution for her at the moment. We don't have to verify the situation right now. And then if you have any other details, just go ahead and add that. You'll never press save and add another. You just save. We want to know if the person has justice involvement in their history. And then, by the way, I should mention, if this current living situation will be different than the prior living situation if tonight this person's going to stay in a shelter or something somewhere else. So if the person came into the shelter and that's why they're getting assessed, and tonight they're going to stay in the shelter, go ahead and change that to their current situation. So when the person's situation isn't changing, this current and the prior are going to stay the same. Housing details. So we definitely want to know the household size. We've got 4, 1 adult, 3 kids. And then please complete the entire list of children. We want to know where people are willing to live and where they're not willing to live, and their income and education, AMI, and you can read through these questions in detail. We'll need you to complete the VI and then document any information. Where I put the consent, you can also include any documentation that you think might be useful there. Housing providers will be able to access that later when they're matched to housing. So you're done with the assessment. You want to go up here to VI Disability and the Vulnerability Index and Disability. We want to know, did the individual complete the HMIS supplemental client consent for sharing of certain disability and data information? Yes, they did. They did not decline to share their information. And the client does have a disability. We learned that she is dealing with bipolar disorder. And you can complete the type of disability as well. So we have this question 3 different times, the exact wording, because people can have all kinds of co-occurring situations. We only know of one for this person. And once we're done with that, we're going to add the family vulnerability index because she's a family. And I'll let you read through those questions yourself. We decided that she's not underreporting her disability, and that we don't think we think that they've had their full faculties. Although they do have a severe mental health condition, it's not affecting their ability to excuse me. Sorry. So the client has a severe mental health condition and awareness of this condition. We're saying that this person has bipolar disorder, and for our purposes, this person has been semi-functional and able to function, and so we're going to say that they don't have a severe mental health condition. We're done with the assessment. We learned that the client has a history of domestic violence, so we're going to lock the record by clicking this green button up here, the little lock symbol, and delete the global. You're also able to add a visibility group if you have access to a project. So sometimes you'll be able to do this. You can add this so that when you look for the client record in your other project, you'll be able to do that once you've left the EDA mode. The client comes back a little later. They have some more information for you. You're going to add an interim update over here. Save and continue, and then let's just say the client has perhaps changed their phone number or added some new information about that. All of these little bars, you should be able to look and see what the history is here for most of the questions that have been completed. So we've added an update. You'll only ever go through the interim update to add information. The caveat to that is if you had to correct something once you completed an assessment, you could just go in here. But for the most part, I would say 99.9% of the time, you're going to change information via the interim update. So we've locked the assessment, we've added the entry, we've updated the client's consent form to the client profile, we've updated any other documents that might be relevant for the final provider. We are done adding this client record. Thank you very much, and I look forward to working with you.